When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Goblin YouTube channel. Today's video, we are going to be talking about the Great Council of 101 AC. And specifically, why it's very suspicious, it doesn't seem to add up, and why there was more that was going on than what we're told in Fire and Blood. For those people that don't remember the Great Council of 101 OC that well, really what it was supposed to determine was who was going to come after Jaehaerys, the old king. We saw a little bit of it at the very beginning of House of the Dragon, but more or less the big decision was, okay, all of Jaehaerys' sons are either dead or they're not really fit for the throne at this point. So how does the line of succession work then? Do we go to the oldest son's first children and being Rhaenys or her offspring? Do we go to his next son, and do we go to his first son or his first offspring? How does it work? Where does the line of succession go? And that was what this Great Council was supposed to do, is taking all these great lords together and doing a similar system as the Night's Watch, where they would all vote on who would to be the next ruler after Jaehaerys. So that's where a lot of the suspicion comes from. If you guys remember, the way Jon becomes Lord Commander is also very suspicious. There's a lot of things where you have kind of a blind man helping to do the votes, who also has a lot of sympathies to Jon. We also have Samuel having to do a lot of political maneuvering and bringing forces together to get Jon to be the Lord Commander. So all of it's suspicious. And so you take that and you put it on a grander scale where you have more people that are wanting one side to come out on top or the other. You have more things like the Maester Conspiracy going on here at way bigger of a stage that could influence the rest of the kingdoms and the future of the realm. But not only that, you also have a war that could break out if this decision goes one way or the other. Remember, Corlys Velaryon and the Velaryons have been building up a fleet at this time. Daemon Targaryen, the one in the normal story for House of the Dragon, the Dance of Dragons, was building up swords for his brother in support. Both sides were building up to this decision. But before we kind of break down the things that I think are very suspicious and talk about the Great Council of 101 OEC, I want to take the time to shout out to my Patreons and members. Thank you for supporting me. If you wanted to become one, you do get videos early, and also you can try to request a video. If it is something I feel like I can do a video on, I will do one. Well, let's get into the Great Council of 101 AC. So I want to start out with the things that I think are very suspicious right away, and then we'll kind of look at all the supporting evidence we have for some of these things, or maybe holes in evidence that we don't have but that are left up to interpretation. So when we look at the two claimants, the two major claimants was the Velaryon faction with Rhaenys and then her son Laenor, or it was with Viserys. Now, you can already see why this seems very similar to the Dance of Dragons. You have, in reality, if you were going for Rhaenys, it was either you were going for Rhaenys as a woman to be the next ruler, or you were going for Rhaenys' child Laenor, who was very young at the time. And so you were still saying that Rhaenys was basically going to be on the throne, but that when Laenor came of age, he would become king. Very similar to like Tommen, for instance, in the main story. That's what you were kind of asking. Or if you thought only a man could sit the throne, you would be looking more towards Viserys. Now, there's other things beyond that. Let's take a look at, if you, again, you're going to have to do some background research. I'm not going to break down the entire Maester Conspiracy idea in this video. So if you want more information on that, I would check out my Maester Conspiracy theory series. I also did a reaction to Preston Jacobs if you want some information there. Also, I've just done individual videos. But from those videos, what I have concluded is that the Maesters, at the very least, did not want the dragons and or magic to be in the world, and were trying to take down the Targaryens. And so when you keep that in the back of your mind, let's look at some suspicious actions that kind of seem to justify that conclusion. Viserys Targaryen is a person who, yes, he had ridden Balerion, but Balerion had died a year, I think it was about a year after he rides him. Balerion was very sluggish, and he ends up dying. Viserys, after this point, did not take another dragon. He was someone that could be influenced very easily. He was someone that was not a warrior king. He wasn't like a Maegor or a Daemon type where he was a great warrior and also had a bit of a hothead. Viserys was more like a tamed version of Jaehaerys. He's someone much more comparable to Aenys. And so if you're looking at it from that point of view, if you're wanting someone that's more easily going to be controlled, allow you to get more influence, Viserys is going to be the right path. Now, the question is, how if you're, say, the High Towers, were you going to get power? Because Viserys was married at the time to Aemma Arryn, like we do see in the normal story. So you might have been thinking, okay, maybe they're children you would marry to, right? And Rhaenyra, as she comes into fruition and all that. But at this time, Viserys was the easier choice if you wanted more of a weaker and tamer king. And that's something to keep in your mind, right? But also the other part of this is if you look at the other side, and this is why I think it's so interesting. Rhaenys at this time was a dragon rider. She had her dragon Meleys. But not only that, her children were going to be dragon riders as well. So that is really important to understand. And Rhaenys is someone that's much more different than Viserys. Rhaenys was someone that was not going to take people's crap. She was someone that stood up for herself much more. And so Rhaenys is someone that just was not going to be easily controlled. She wasn't going to be easily manipulated. And so you also think about who her husband was. You know, outside their children also being kind of a threat in that regard. Her husband is Corlys Velaryon, the Sea Snake, a very ambitious man, someone that wanted power. He was someone that was also not going to be easily controlled. And so you put that into fruition, along with the Velaryons being the most rich house in Westeros that is set in fire and blood. So not only were they're not the most powerful house, they're probably like second to the Targaryens at this point of the story. That's a lot of power they're going to get if you put them on the throne. It could be almost seen as a Velaryon takeover mixed in with the Targaryens as well. But at this time, if you're a maester, if you're someone that's a common person that doesn't have dragons, if you're not a Targaryen big loyalist or supporter, you would probably want Viserys on the throne. Viserys is just a much easier target to deal with. He's not going to be able to rule with more of an iron fist, whereas Corlys and Rhaenys would have been able to do that much easier. And so you put that part of it into it, right? Where the magical elements, the dragon element is much more favoring the Velaryon side, the Corlys and the Rhaenys side, than it was the Viserys side. Now, Daemon was still someone that you wouldn't have liked being on Viserys' side, because, again, as we see later, Daemon is not a very big favorite of the Maesters and also of Otto Hightower. Again, Otto Hightower was the hand of the king at this time, so he would have had a lot of influence and sway in trying to figure out what he wanted to end up happening. And so that kind of leads us to some of the things we know ends up happening. In Fire and Blood, we are never told what the official count votes, which to me is already super suspicious. Why would that information not be told? There's only about 3 reasons I could think of. The first reason is, well, it's just a lot of votes. You know, it doesn't really, it kind of seems convoluted maybe to tell everybody what all these votes are. And what if, you know, you kind of lost count and it wasn't exact and all of that? Maybe. I mean, again, I don't think that makes sense. Given how detailed a lot of the Maesters are and they pride themselves in doing that, I don't think that makes sense at all. But it is an option. The second option is, well, if it was closer than it was, right? Let's say that it was more like 60-40 for Viserys. That could lead to war, because that means Corlys and Rhaenys have enough support to start a war, right? That there was a split. That's something that you would really want to avoid. Think about what ends up happening with Rhaenyra and Aegon in the House of the Dragon or the Dance with Dragons. So that could be another reason as to why you wouldn't say what it was and just declare who the winner was, right? That can mean a lot. That can make a lot of sense. But thirdly, it could be because the Maesters rigged it and that the person that they wanted to win either barely did or didn't at all. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that Viserys probably didn't win, but I am someone that believes the second option. I think the second option is that it was much closer than we're led to believe. We're told that Viserys was winning 20-1 against Rhaenys. That, or well, I guess Rhaenys and Laenor, right? Which to me makes no sense. In Fire and Blood, we are told that a number of major houses supported Rhaenys/Laenor's claim. Now, notably, that's going to be the Starks, that's going to be the Baratheons, that's going to be the Velaryons themselves. But we're also told the Velaryons had quite a lot of influence as well, that they were able to bribe people and pay people off. Again, richest house in Westeros at the time. That's what we're told directly in Fire and Blood. And you're telling me with two major houses that would have had a lot of influence over their respected lords, with how respected Corlys would have been, the influence he would have had, you're telling me that they only got a 20-1 odds? Think about how bad that is. That is 100 people voting out of 100 people voting. Okay? That is basically saying that 5 of those people voted for Corlys and Rhaenys. That doesn't make sense. I'm sorry, that doesn't make sense. Now, you could chalk it up to Westeros being sexist, but once again, Laenor was still an option, right? Their campaign was not built upon the fact that Rhaenys was going to sit the throne. The idea was that Laenor would sit the throne eventually, but until then, Corlys and Rhaenys would rule as a joint leadership over him, right? Until he came of age. That was the point. And so the idea that the Maesters tried to present into why Viserys won so easily was, one, because he had rode Balerion, which doesn't seem like much, right? If it depends, I guess, how the narrative was, right? If people were saying, oh yeah, Viserys rode the great dragon Balerion, then maybe. But I think to a lot of people that were lords, they would have seen this as, okay, I mean, all he did was he rode this dragon that was on its deathbed. It dies right after Viserys rides him. Okay. The other part was maybe you would have seen more legitimacy with Viserys. He was a male. He was closer in line in terms of being a male than Laenor was. That's also true. I mean, you can also justify that. But I think, do all those things justify a 20-1 lead over what we're told is a very tough decision, right? It's built up as being this very close thing, as a close call of what people will have to decide. And we even look at later, when we look at Rhaenyra, Rhaenyra has a lot of support. Now, part of that is because people swore oaths to her, and she was named the heir by Viserys. But a part of that is people also do not believe, like, that it should solely be a man in charge, regardless of how far down the line of succession they are, right? There are people in Westeros that don't believe it. Another thing I find fascinating, the Prince of Dorne also was at this great council. And you have to believe, given Dornish law, he also would have supported Rhaenys. Now, whether he had a lot of votes or a lot of sway or whatnot, given his station, is yet to be determined. But another thing we don't really understand here is, how was the voting done? Was it as simple as all the lords got one vote, and that's how it went? Or was it, okay, you're a higher lord, so you get this amount of votes, blah, 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 blah? Because in this situation, that would be very flawed. Right? We know the Reach and the Lannisters, and again, the Westermen, the Reach, have a lot more people, right? So their influence would have been heavier than something like the North, for instance. All of this paints this very sketchy picture, because if you're the Maesters, at this point, you probably would have said, oh yeah, let's have Viserys be on the throne. Easier to manipulate and all of that. Because let's say at this time, and again, I'm pretty much putting Jaehaerys out of the way, because Jaehaerys at this point was a really old guy. He was going to die very shortly after this anyway. He was very feeble-minded. He didn't remember a lot of who his counselors were when it came towards the end. I don't think he would have been a big factor at this point. If a civil war breaks out, who is more likely to win? That's what I'm asking. And when it comes to dragon power, and it comes to actual power as a whole, it's really just Rhaenys versus Daemon in terms of dragon power, right? And so that would have been interesting. It would have been much more of a 50-50 in terms of that. And so if you're the Maesters, you don't exactly want a war because you can't really predict who's going to win necessarily. Now, with all that being said, I think it's very telling to look at what happens, what follows this event. It is literally the thing that leads to Dance of Dragons. Now, it doesn't directly, because there's other things that unluckily happened for Viserys. Again, him not having a son with Aemma Arryn was detrimental. Him not reinforcing that Rhaenyra was the heir, it just seems like he thought, oh yeah, even the situation changing, that nothing changed. He should have had people, again, reaffirming that she was the heir even later in his life, as well as, again, putting more precautions in place to have Rhaenyra go to the throne. Also not exiling her basically to Dragonstone to split up the greens and the blacks, giving Alicent more influence over court and more hold when he dies. There are other things that Viserys did wrong in terms of what happened to that conflict, but this moment is a huge moment because what else can the Faith slash the Maesters, just the Hightowers, do here? They can set a precedent that a lot of people are going to follow in the future. That the male heir always comes before the female heir no matter what happens. It's always the male first. That's what this kind of paints. Now, with that being said, could the Maesters have predicted that what was going to happen is going to happen? No, but I think it was the safer option. I think they definitely influenced these events and made it to where there was not a war that sparked out between the two sides. Because again, I think if Corlys and Rhaenys saw that there was a 60-40 decision, I think they would have gone to war. I think the problem is because it comes out that it was so overwhelmingly for Viserys, it was 20-1, that you can't really go against that if you're Rhaenys and Corlys, because it shows you have no support in Westeros, right? And it just shows that it wasn't really even a choice, right? People just all voted for Viserys. So again, let me know what you guys think. Maybe I'm looking into it too much, but I'd love to hear what your guys' thoughts are on Rhaenys, the queen who never was.